We're going through our top 30 running back rankings for Week 11 fantasy football, so there's no time to waste. But I am giving away 5 free FFN hats when I hit 18,000 subscribers, and the way to qualify to get one is to go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and give me your hottest take for Week 11 fantasy football. This is my way of giving you guys an early Christmas present. Dropping down to our first tier right here, we've got our obvious guys every single week. Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson. Honestly, kind of rank these guys how you want to. To me, Saquon Barkley and Joe Mixon, they both have good matchups that I like. Saquon obviously playing on Thursday night. I think that he's going to have a great game against Washington here. With Saquon Barkley, the only thing to really discuss here is that if you actually look at his game long in depth, he has down weeks, I guess, from the perspective of like not getting the 20 to 25 point games, right? Like there's some weeks that he could get you 8 or 10 fantasy points just because maybe they're kicking the crap out of some opponent and they don't need to use him. I think this is actually a little bit of a more competitive game and they need to use Saquon Barkley and the matchup is just right. And then with Joe Mixon here, this is a matchup that obviously is just amazing. At Dallas, this is not, they can't get any better. Dallas is a disgrace. They're a total disgrace, and Joe Mixon, he's been good every week. This guy has been bust-proof. Even last week when they played the Detroit Lions, that's a stout run defense. He still was able to manage a good fantasy performance for you. Joe Mixon against a bad opponent, give me him all day. Derrick Henry at Pittsburgh, this one is a little bit concerning to me, although I have said all week, this is a matchup where Pittsburgh and Baltimore both like to display who has the bigger balls. That's what this matchup always turns into. It's always run heavy, physicality. This is about pushing your opponent around and imposing your will on the opponent. It's a great football game to watch, but it also does sometimes limit the upside in fantasy. But of course, in that type of matchup, that should favor a Henry, but I do get concerned about the matchup with Pittsburgh. And then Bijan in Denver. This also is just a concerning matchup here. That's why Henry and Bijan are just a little bit lower this week. Obviously, Bijan's been great. I said this weeks ago, I was definitely wrong about Bijan Robinson. He's been fantastic for over the past month. Again, it's just a matchup thing. At Denver, not the greatest matchup here, but I do think that, of course, Bijan will get his, and he'll still be really good this week inside of Tier 1. Dropping down to our next tier right here. Devon Achane at number 5, and Christian McCaffrey at 6. So with Devon Achane here, obviously his week last week was pretty disappointing. Like against the Los Angeles Rams, he didn't cross 100 total yards from scrimmage. He didn't get in the end zone at all. Like, it was a down week for Devon Achane. Now, obviously, this is not what we've come to expect from Devon Achane, but I guess the way I look at this is that, number one, the matchup's fantastic. We already know that's there. The Raiders are a horrible defense. But number two, Devon Achane, like, if you look at his games with Tua, that was his worst game, and it still wasn't horrific. It didn't end your week or anything like that. So with Devon Achane, I do think that he's in good position to rebound this week. And then with Christian McCaffrey, I also think he's in line for a much better performance than what we just saw. With Christian McCaffrey versus Seattle, last week, he didn't average more than 3 yards per carry. Again, totally fine. It's his first game back from an Achilles injury. And number two, what saved his week, it always will, is the receiving upside. He's got tons of it, and you can expect that all over again. So with McCaffrey, I just don't get concerned about a lack of efficiency in his first game back. I expect him to be more efficient in this game and get that same level of volume that he already did in his first week back. Alvin Kamara at 7 and Kyren Williams at 8. Now with Alvin Kamara versus the Cleveland Browns, he's so bust-proof because of his volume. On a per-game basis, like, he's always getting 20 opportunities per game. And he's getting over 100 yards from scrimmage because he's their offense. Like, that is their bread and butter. That's their whole offense. Without him, they're nothing. They're nothing. So Alvin Kamara, just out of importance, is always going to be inside the top 10. This matchup versus Cleveland, I don't think it's as great as it may sound. Cleveland's defense is getting healthier out of the bye, and their defense has played better with Jameis Winston because they're not always on the field constantly. So with Kamara, maybe just a little bit lower. I have to ding him down just a little bit because of the matchup. And then with Kyren at New England here, obviously this matchup's good. Like, the matchup doesn't scare me off or anything like that. 2 games straight without a touchdown feels weird. Obviously, sometimes you can't control that kind of stuff. Kyron's obviously going to be great. I just am bumping him down a little bit here because sometimes he is taken off the field for Blake Corum, and we didn't really, it's harder to notice that when he's scoring touchdowns. You don't think to yourself, well, what's the reason for this? Obviously, with Kyren being taken off the field, it doesn't matter until he stops scoring touchdowns. And he has stopped scoring the last 2 games, so it does make you think a little bit. But Kyron's still going to be great. Don't overthink it is all I'm saying. Jahmyr Gibbs at 9 and Kenneth Walker at 10 to round out the tier. With Jahmyr Gibbs versus Jacksonville, matchup couldn't be better. I mean, we all understand the Jaguars are a destructive team. Like, they have self-destructed. They have imploded. It's actually hilarious to watch. This is just, like, their coach is sweating so bad. Doug Peterson is sweating so bad. I thought he just came out of the swimming pool. That guy's a dead man walking. Their defense is so horrible, and Jahmyr Gibbs has obviously been elite. You don't really need to hear me talk about how elite Jahmyr Gibbs has been because it comes from the efficiency and the targets. That's what he always gets, and he's always going to continue to get that. And then with Kenneth Walker at San Francisco, you know, it doesn't sound like a good matchup, and I don't think it is. But I will say this, the first time they played, Kenneth Walker was able to get out of there with an excellent fantasy game, and it's actually not because he was efficient. He was just getting so many targets in that particular game. Now, that's kind of a weak, like, it doesn't usually happen like that. Kenneth Walker's usually not getting 8 targets like he did against the first time they played the San Francisco 49ers. So he's going to have to be more efficient in this game, and that's why I've ranked him down at 10, because the matchup is ultimately tough, but I still do believe in his ability to have a good fantasy game. Dropping down to our next tier, Jonathan Taylor at 11 and Breece Hall at 12. Now, these two are playing each other. Obviously, it's in New York, so with Jonathan Taylor, the matchup is obviously fantastic. Now, if you haven't seen, they just switched back to Anthony Richardson. It's a little bit hard to tell who he's going to be better with because he did miss some time with Anthony Richardson, and he's also just a fantastic player, so it's like, does it really even matter? I don't think it matters too much, but the one thing with Jonathan Taylor is with Anthony Richardson, he's going to get less opportunities through the air because Anthony Richardson runs. He's not going to check the ball down quite as much. So with Jonathan Taylor, I've just got him down here at 11, not as a slight, but just as a reality check that he doesn't get as many targets to really maximize his ceiling. And then with Breece Hall here, it sucks. It sucks. I mean, like, obviously he's a top 12 back. Like, I believe he's fully a top 12 back. But the last several weeks, I mean, he's just been unspectacular. Like, he's been good. On a per-touch basis, he's actually been more efficient than he was for the first half of the year. But Breece Hall is just not getting it done as far as fantasy production goes. He's still lagging in the touchdown department, and even when he does get a bunch of targets, it's just not going for big plays. So with Breece Hall here versus the Indianapolis Colts, the matchup's good, but I obviously have my concerns with Breece Hall. David Montgomery at 13 and Kareem Hunt at 14. Now with David Montgomery versus Jacksonville, obviously, like I said, matchup's fantastic. David Montgomery is definitely the back in Detroit that is more dependent on matchups week to week. He's not as efficient as Jahmyr Gibbs, and he obviously doesn't get the targets that Jahmyr Gibbs gets as well. Now, in this scenario, he's always like a touchdown base guy. Like, most weeks, like, his fantasy value comes from a touchdown, and most weeks you can guarantee it. This week you could definitely guarantee it, so that's why he's a little bit higher on this list this week. And then Kareem Hunt at 14 and James Cook at 15, same matchup, taking on the Kansas City Chiefs in Buffalo this week. Now with Kareem Hunt, I think that he's, still going to be a must-start. Obviously, there's a report out that Isaiah Pacheco is been designated to return, but he's not expected to play this week. Here's the deal. As long as Hunt is the number 1 running back in this offense, you play him. He's averaging more than 20 carries per game, and he's also getting about 3 to 4 targets per game as well. Kareem Hunt, you just do not sit him. He has got too much upside just being a Kansas City Chiefs running back. And versus Buffalo, the matchup isn't terrible on the ground for running backs. And then with James Cook here, I think he'll struggle a little bit in this game. I ordinarily would have Cook ranked above guys like Hunt, guys like Montgomery, maybe even someone like a Breece Hall at this point. But with James Cook versus Kansas City, they're, first of all, top tier against running backs in fantasy. They're the number 1 defense against running backs in fantasy. And with James Cook, this feels like a game script to where it kind of could stray away from him a little bit. I don't know for sure, but I have seen a lot of these games become shootouts between Mahomes and Josh Allen, and it kind of feels like one of those games where they may stray away from James Cook a little bit. I'll tell you one thing I don't debate in my own head, though, is Aaron Rodgers' projection on Underdog this week. It's at 0.5 total yards. For new customers, you hit the higher on this one, you're winning free money. So to get in on this one right here, go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, and use code FFN to sign up for Underdog. When you take advantage of the sweat-free pick with Aaron Rodgers this week, they will match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we've got Chase Brown at 16 and Josh Jacobs at 17. So with Chase Brown here, obviously he's in a situation where he's the lead back, and even last week when he had a tougher matchup versus Baltimore, he put up really good numbers that went against my prediction for him that particular week. Chase Brown is going to be good in fantasy moving forward because he's obviously going to get the volume. Khalil Herbert is not a real threat in this backfield. The only touch he's had as a Bengal was a fumble. So I don't think that he's going to all of a sudden eat into Chase Brown's role at a significant pace. Again, the matchup's tough. Los Angeles Chargers, this is a tough matchup once again, but Chase Brown, just based on the targets that he got last week and based on his efficiency most weeks, yeah, I think Chase Brown's going to be a good play in fantasy. Josh Jacobs is 17 versus the Chicago Bears. It's in Chicago, and DeAndre Swift versus Green Bay. Now, with Josh Jacobs, I think that coming out of the bye, Green Bay is going to play really well. Chicago's defense has gotten they're not as good as they were before the bye. Since they came out of the bye, their defense has struggled. And I do think it's a culture thing. So is this fixed with them firing their offensive coordinator? I don't know. That also affects DeAndre Swift's ranking. But with Josh Jacobs here, I prefer him a little bit over DeAndre Swift in this game because it does feel like a game where Green Bay could really destroy the Bears here, and Josh Jacobs just might end up handling a big load towards the end of the ballgame. And then with, DeAndre Swift, again, like I said, does firing Shane Waldron really fix their problems? Because he's not their only problem. He was a horrible offensive coordinator. I've said it for a while. But if your quarterback isn't completing basic throws and making plays like he was expected to, like their upside is just not very high against a high-scoring offense and a high-potency offense, which Green Bay is. So Swift is still inside top 20 because he's going to get the targets that he needs. And he's been really efficient this year. But with Swift, I do have concerns about, post-Waldron, what does this offense look like? And do they have an identity? Again, Waldron sucked, but what is their identity moving forward? I need that question answered this week. J.K. Dobbins at 19 to round this tier out. Versus Cincinnati, the one thing that worried me last week, I've been a big J.K. guy all year long. This is a problem, though. Gus Edwards came back his first game back from injured reserve and basically matched J.K. Dobbins once again in volume. If you remember at the beginning of the year, that's exactly what happened. J.K. Dobbins last week, though, he didn't get in the end zone, and he wasn't clearly the more effective running back. Gus Edwards actually looked pretty good on his touches last week. So it does make me curious, and it makes me worried. Are they going to go into the second half of the season with Gus Edwards as their guy? Like, I don't know. I'm not ready to say that, obviously. JK's here at 19, and you won't see Gus Edwards on this list right now. But I do have that question, and I do have that concern when it comes to JK this week. Dropping down to our next tier, Nick Chubb at 20 and Aaron Jones at 21. Obviously, if you have not seen it yet today, go watch the must-start videos where I go through guys I have tons of conviction on this week. Nick Chubb is on that list. I think this is a good week to play Nick Chubb. He's taking on the Saints, who are 29th versus the running back position in fantasy football. Nick Chubb also has gotten better in efficiency every week that he's been back, with the exception of playing the Chargers. Well, this is a break matchup coming off a bye. I expect Chubb to be another week healthier. I think Nick Chubb is in for a good matchup this week. Aaron Jones at 21. Obviously, he got carted off. If you didn't see that game, he got carted off last week, and then he returned. It was like, that's usually something you don't see. So how injured is he really? He's going into the week probably with a questionable tag. But at the same time, if he was able to come back and play, I would assume that he'll be able to play in this one. Tennessee is not the best matchup. It's not the worst matchup. But obviously with Aaron Jones, he's been so efficient on most of his work. The question really becomes, do they start to maybe limit his volume a little bit and give it to more Cam Akers? Like, that's what I worry about and I wonder with Aaron Jones, is because since he's such an injury-prone player, do they start to lessen his volume a little bit? Najee Harris at 22. Najee Harris was actually really close to being a must-start for me this week. I opted not to do it, but if you look back throughout Najee's entire career in the NFL, he's had a lot of good games against the Ravens here. And it's like I said earlier, this is a who's got the bigger balls matchup. they will run the ball. And they always run the ball anyways. Najee Harris is handling 20 plus carries basically the last month of fantasy. Now he's injured with an ankle. Newsflash, this guy's going to play in this game. He's very highly motivated this year because it's a contract year for him. And Najee Harris, just his history with Baltimore. This is a good matchup, not because of when you look at metrics here, but just when you look at the history of this matchup with Najee Harris, he has historically played pretty well versus the Baltimore Ravens. And then Ramondre Stevenson at 23 to round this tier out. Versus the Los Angeles Rams, the Ramondre Stevenson, he's actually, last week, for example, he actually was getting the volume, and he wasn't super efficient or anything like that, but he still is obviously the workhorse in this backfield. Now, the Rams matchup is not a good one. That's a tough matchup to be able to take advantage of, again, kind of like it was with the Bears last week. But with Ramondre Stevenson, having him here at 23, it's not because it's a slight. It's because he just doesn't have the ceiling of those other guys in the tier above, like a Chase Brown, like a DeAndre Swift, like a Josh Jacobs. He doesn't have that kind of ceiling for me this week versus the Los Angeles Rams. But he's not a bad play this week by any stretch of the imagination. I just don't prefer him over those types of ceiling guys when I don't think this is a ceiling matchup for Ramondre. Dropping down to our next tier right here, we've got Brian Robinson Jr. at 24 and Rico Dowdle at 25. With Brian Robinson Jr., does he play? Does he not play? I've heard that he's liking his chances, himself said that. We don't know what that actually means because we have no idea. He's been limited in practice all week. He's missed the last 2 games. What's the likelihood he comes into a Thursday night game and plays? I don't know. 50-50 chance maybe. I don't think this matchup's any good though. And really when he comes back, what are the chances he's going to get 100%? He's not going to. They've already been using Eckler and McNichols and Rodriguez Jr. throughout basically the entire season. They don't want to give too much of a workload with Brian Robinson Jr. So, he's just been a little bit fragile this year, and the matchup isn't my particular favorite. If he was playing a team like the Saints, then we'd have a different story. Or a team like the Panthers, then we'd have a different story. But this isn't a great matchup to come back into. Rico Dowdle at 25 versus Houston. The matchup sucks, number one, and the Cowboys suck. Rico Dowdle last week, he did serviceable in fantasy, I guess. But his upside, realistically, is it going to be any better than CeeDee Lamb's? Obviously, CeeDee has more upside. But my point being, the upside, the big boom games that we saw from Rico for a couple weeks with Dak, I think those are out the window. I don't think it's going to be there with him anymore. You've got Cooper Rush, you've got Trey Lance. Take your pick. Throw me out there at quarterback. I think I could do just as good. So, I just don't think that Rico Dowdle has that same level of upside at this point. And then Tony Pollard at 26. His upside took a massive hit last week when Tyjae Spears came back. And then he was more involved. It was more of a split backfield than we've seen all year from the Titans. So, yes, that's a problem. And especially versus the Minnesota Vikings, that's a big problem because it's already not a good plus matchup, and you're also going to be sharing opportunities with Tyjae Spears moving forward. It's not good. This is not a backfield that you want a piece of anymore. Dropping down to our last tier, Alexander Madison at 27 and Audric Estime at 28. Obviously, with Alexander Madison, he's the lead back in Las Vegas. Zamir White is a no-show. That guy is irrelevant. Miami, I would ordinarily say, I kind of like the matchup. The way they shut down Kyren Williams last week made me kind of question this one. But obviously with Alexander Madison, even if it was the Carolina Panthers, how much upside does he have really? It's all usually tied to a touchdown or not a touchdown. But obviously Alexander Madison, still the RB1 in a matchup that's somewhat beatable. And I do think he gets enough work to be inside the top 30. Audric Estime, on the other hand, this one feels weird. Obviously, he led the backfield in Denver last week, but this one is not set in stone. They have been carouseling running backs all year, and I don't think it stops here. It's not like he blew anyone away with his workload last week. Yeah, he got the majority, but it's not like he's just getting 5 yards per carry. This isn't Audric Estime. Versus Atlanta, matchup beatable. That's honestly why he's inside the top 30, though. I don't trust this workload to sustain itself in Denver right now. Travis Etienne at 29 and Jaylen Warren at 30. Look how far things have fallen for Travis Etienne. Really sad. Player I loved last year, but this year was never there. And it's really not been there. I didn't expect him to be this bad. The Jags suck. They're taking on Detroit. What is the upside in this matchup? His best game this year, basically been 13 fantasy points. This guy has little to no upside. I feel sad just talking about it. Jaylen Warren at 30, versus Baltimore, like I said, with Jaylen Warren, this is a good game script because there's going to be so many opportunities, and Jaylen Warren has been getting more involved, and especially in the passing game as well. The guy makes plays, so all he really needs is that right ball to fall in that right hole, and he can get in the end zone. I think it could happen in a high upside matchup like the Baltimore Ravens this week. Not because the Baltimore Ravens stink with running backs in fantasy. They don't, but because of the nature of this matchup over the years, they're going to use their running backs ad nauseum in this game. So let me know how your lineup is looking this weekend. If you want to see the top 12 defense rankings for this week, click on this video right here.